So hi, everyone. We are so excited that you could join us today. And I look forward to a great conversation with our panelist, Matt Crooks from Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, more commonly abbreviated to WMATA. So let's dive right in, and I want to show you our agenda. We will, of course, start with introductions so you get to understand who we are. I'll give some very high-level context around what Swiftly is, and then drill down a bit into Swiftly Runtimes in particular, which is the anchor for this discussion today in terms of how WMATA used that tool. And then I will ask Matt a lot of questions, some really good ones to kind of unpack how we arrived at the results that we did. And we want to save time for audience question and answer as well. So before we get going, I mentioned the audience question and answer session. By this point in the world we live in, probably most people on this call have been on Zoom, but just in case, I want to make sure we all are familiar with the Q&A bit, which you should see on the bottom of your Zoom screen. It should say Q&A. I would love for people to test that out right now and just send in your role at your transit agency that you work at, so that we can make sure that we're seeing those responses. We wouldn't want your questions to get lost along the discussion. So great. Transit planners. I see some schedulers on the line. This will be really, really cool for you. Great. And some innovation officers, like what I see here. So the functionality is working. If you have any questions at all throughout the course of this, go ahead and plunk them in there. And then we will ask the questions that we can at the end of this, given the time. And if we don't get to your question, we will certainly follow up with an answer. So let's go ahead and get started. Matt, tell us about yourself. Walk me through not only you and your role, but also give us a sense of what the WMATA service area and ridership look like.
Hi, good afternoon or good morning to you, wherever you're coming from. My name is Matt Crooks. I work for WMATA's Office of Intermodal Strategic Planning, which is basically our bus and rail service planning and scheduling functions. I manage a team of analysts that support our planners and schedulers, as well as producing our schedule exports for every sign-up that goes up on the buses. The WMATA service area, we are in the Washington Metropolitan Area region, so we serve not only the district, but Maryland and Virginia as well, with fixed route bus service, as well as Metro Rail service. We have, we have our Metro Rail service, as well as Metro Access, which is paratransit. There are also different local bus operators in the area for each of their jurisdictions.
Wonderful. I'm sure most of the folks on the call have heard of WMATA, but it's always nice to kind of paint that picture. And howdy for all of those of you who haven't met me. I'm Meredith Bordoni. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Swiftly. I describe my role in a variety of ways, but I kind of have the luxury of marrying the transit industry needs, like talking with all of our customers, all of the transit agencies out there, and then with the amazing technology that we have at our disposal in 2021 to help solve problems for transit agencies and for their riders. And so I'm really looking forward to talking through this and walking us through Runtimes, which we've used today. So before we launch into WMATA specifically, I want to give the high level about what Swiftly is. We do three core things, I would say, and you see the names of each product line up here. Each of these product lines does something slightly different, but they all work really well together. On the left-hand side, you see transit time. Those are our tools around real-time passenger information. So really at the core being passenger-facing predictions of the network with some accompanying tools. And if you go counterclockwise, we see metronome. Those are our real-time operations tools, allowing kind of a really close feedback loop between dispatch and the operator on board the vehicle, and making sure everybody, including passengers and other staff, has really good visibility into any ad hoc service changes that are happening on the network. And then the last part of this little trifecta is insights. That's where we'll be spending most of our time today. Insights is a look at all of that enormous volume of data historically, so that we really can understand what problems are occurring, why, where, more habitually, and we can make really informed scheduling and infrastructure plans based on that data. So one of our insights modules is called Runtimes, and this module allows folks to see how long it takes vehicles to get from point A to point B. I think most people on this call are pretty familiar with the concept of travel times or run times. The Swiftly Runtimes module has many different views, ways to zoom out and look at the whole network to see where things are falling kind of shorter or longer than expected in terms of the scheduled run times. But you can also drill in by route, you can drill in by path, you can drill in by trip, you can drill in by stop, and really slice and dice things, understanding aggregate run times and dwell times. You can look at percentiles, distributions. But the tool that we're spending more time on today, I forgot to mention that you can also use comparison views to understand different date ranges or different days of the week and understand their compared travel times. And then the thing that we're going to spend most time on today is the suggested runtimes view, which takes all of this data and helps service planning, scheduling, performance planning really understand where they can have a high impact if they make changes to their node to node runtimes or stop to stop runtimes, and kind of eke out more gains in on-time performance. So I'm really excited to talk with Matt and learn about their process and watch, follow along as they work through some really impressive gains. So if you read the case study that kind of accompanies this webinar, which I would highly encourage you to do, the end result here was that WMATA was able to adjust the runtimes of 34 routes in a single service change with a network improvement of about 6.2% increase in on-time performance, and that's percentage points. So it went up from about 67% to 73% for all stops on the network. So really amazing, really impressive. I'm really proud of the work that all of the WMATA team did on this. And then now I want to walk us through how that happened, thanks to Matt, who was kind of at the front seat of this, or in the front seat. So Matt, on to you. Tell me what was top of mind for you guys. Take us back before you ran through this process, and what was the world like?
So, you know, when the pandemic first started and we saw a decrease in our ridership, a decrease in traffic volumes, our scheduled running times were now much longer than what was actually being operated or experienced in the field. So a lot of our routes were took a hit in terms of on-time performance, that they were operating earlier than normal. So we wanted to be able to use better data to make sure our schedules match the new reality in terms of pandemic running times. And also keep in mind, we wanted to keep reliable service for other initiatives we wanted to put out to attract riders back, where especially last September, we introduced some fare and service changes. So having reliable running times, was important to making sure that when riders come back, or when we bring riders back, that they have a reliable trip.
And I'd love to kind of go a little bit deeper into that and say, like, what were the problems with trying to fix that? Like, what were you dealing with in terms of those trends you were seeing and where you were in this pandemic journey? I think that's a big part of this narrative. Like, why not just change the schedules and use the data that you had at your disposal before?
Right. So, with seeing the shift to earlier running times, there was a desire to change our schedules to be more accurate. However, there was the concern, when would ridership come back? If ridership would come back, when would that happen? How would that impact our running times? And then would we be able to readjust to a new normal of having riders back, but shortening schedules? So we kind of sat in a wait and see approach for a little while to see if and when ridership would come back.
And I guess just to follow up on that, how did you decide, like, now is the time, we can't wait any longer? What were the inputs going into that?
So, it had been a couple months of, lowered OTP because of the earlies. It was after fall 2020, and we still had not seen the ridership come back that we expected, and decided that, it is the time to adjust schedules to more accurately reflect the operation.
And when you were going through this process, like I said, you're WMATA, people know you, you had systems in place, you had workflows in place. So I'm so curious to understand how you decided to employ Swiftly runtimes in this moment, as opposed to relying on maybe your older workflows. And how did you know that that data was going to be the best for the job?
So we decided to use Swiftly for adjusting our running times due to the size of the samples that were available to us within Swiftly. There's a larger sample size than our normal source that we have been using. There's also a lot of flexibility in the way we can slice and dice date ranges within Swiftly, and it was pretty flexible to do different comparisons analyses with different date ranges. So that's why we decided to go with Swiftly for using the running times. And it was also, the refresh rate of the running times, being able to get the most current running times was pretty important to us.
And how long do you typically look at runtimes for? Like over a quarter, over 6 months? What was that like?
Typically, pre-pandemic, it would be over a schedule period or what we call a sign-up period. So it's typically about a quarter, but with the pandemic, as things change from week to week, month to month, we were looking at different ranges of dates, maybe the most recent 2 weeks or the most recent month. So looking at different ranges of dates.
You mentioned the sample size being higher. I'm pretty curious. I heard from several agencies actually that the sample sizes were pretty wonky given the redistribution of travel times, given they had to throw out a lot more samples, or even in some cases that their hardware would stop reporting if things were too early. So in terms of the sample size that you had to work with, are there any like specific trends that you were seeing in terms of why Swiftly had more data?
Yeah, I mean, it's just because I think because of the algorithms that Swiftly uses to ingest data rather than the ones we have been deploying, it was able to still ingest data and analyze it based on the GTFS RT feed that was being used to calculate the run times.
All right, so let's get into the meat of it. What was the process like? Walk us through how you were going back and forth with any other groups, how you were walking through the data yourself, and yeah, tell us kind of the A to Z, and I'll pick that apart and we'll really drill in.
All right. So starting at A, the first task for my team was to identify the routes that were performing the worst in terms of most earlies. And so that was actually a pretty simple process for us of going through the overview module of all the different listing of routes. We're able to just sort descending based on shorter than expected run times, able to easily produce a list of the routes that had the worst earlies, and then forward that on to our planning team as well as the operations and scheduling team to get their insight and their input on the data we were seeing. Once we did that, and we got feedback from the other teams, our planning and scheduling managers were able to pare down the list of different routes that we wanted to adjust the running times on. And then once my team got that list, since Swiftly was fairly new to us in our office, it was really me and my team were the only ones who really had experience using the modules. So we spent a couple days running through the suggested running times modules for all the routes that we had selected to do the adjustments on. Once we ran the suggested runtime modules, we then had to send the data on to our scheduling team for them to actually do the work in the scheduling system to fix the running times. A big part of that, though, for us was to had to download all the CSVs from the module. That way we could format it in a easy to digest format for the scheduling team. People, when they're used to doing something, they can be, they get comfortable with seeing data in a certain way. So we wanted to make sure that the data we gave them was easy to read and easy to understand and easy to implement. So me and my team, we spent a couple, about 2 or 3 days, nights processing all the data and sending it over to the scheduling team.
Okay, so like 2 or 3 nights, 34 routes. That's a little bit different than I would say industry norm on timeline for going through a schedule change that big. You highlighted some good points. Like you started by just sorting to understand where there was too much slack, which routes were the biggest offenders. With your flow before using Swiftly data, were things that simple? Were there different pain points? Were there different? I'm trying to get a sense of what that flow might have looked like before.
Yeah, there are definitely, beforehand, it was more, we would get feedback from operations or from different reports on which routes had the worst OTP. And, beforehand, we weren't really looking for routes that had the worst earlies because that generally in pre-pandemic wasn't a problem. So this was a new problem for us. And so took a more data-driven approach to it rather than starting with feedback and then looking for the problem. We just looked through the data and then asked for the feedback, and being able to select the data and sort it the way we needed to, more flexible than what we had been doing in the past.
Cool. And I did highlight that 34 routes number. Was it common, or were you expecting to see that many routes with opportunities for gains? Or tell me about what a more normal pick would have looked like. How many routes would you normally touch?
Well, during a pick, we would change routes for a variety of reasons, not just schedule changes, but routing changes. But 34 definitely felt like a larger number than we had done prior, just for schedules. It was definitely a large lift for the scheduling team to implement all of this in the time that they did, and they did a great job with it. I think the analysis component using Swiftly, it really, from my perspective, cut down on the time it had taken us beforehand to produce this kind of data and at this scale.
Great. And was there any, we talked a little bit about, right? I probably talked a lot about it at this point, but the improvement of on-time performance being pretty significant on those 34 routes. I think the improvement was around 7%, which ended up lifting the on-time performance for all routes by 6.2%. And so that's not nothing. I'm curious if there are other impacts, though, that maybe more qualitative impacts, how the Runtimes module or the process that you took has changed things for you.
Well, it's definitely, with the Runtimes module now being able to have the most recent data quicker is very, very useful. And the different features of the Runtimes module is something we haven't seen before, like the distributions, the percentiles. It really gives us a different look at our running times. Even during your intro, I was thinking about a time I used the comparison view to look at a runtime on a route, comparing before and after a schedule change. So it definitely gives us a different look into our running times, into the data.
Great. And to kind of round us out here, I want to know this service change, I think, was in September, if I'm not mistaken. So a
This
couple
was in
months ago.
June.
Oh, this was in June. Okay.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit ago. Then we analyzed results. Things were looking good. I'm curious about what you're looking forward to next or currently with respect to using Runtimes data. How has this changed your workflows now?
So, just in terms of the scheduling team using Swiftly for analyzing runtime data, I'm hearing from more of them. They're interested in using the Swiftly modules to evaluate the different schedules and use the suggestion views. Moving forward, I'm using the APIs more in our workflow, since it has a deep data set available. And I think connecting to the API will allow us to do more analysis on running times rather than just identifying earlies and lates, but other kinds of research we want to do into our running times. Great.
And I'll throw in a last question here because you mentioned that your schedulers were hoping to use this data more. I didn't ask this, and I probably should have. Was it difficult to get scheduling on board with the new process? I certainly have heard it from agencies, kind of maybe different size agencies, it's not always easy to make that switch to a different data source. The routines or the workflows are pretty well entrenched. And you mentioned having to adjust the CSV downloads to make sure they were in the right formats. Like, what's that process like? And how did you get buy-in on using new data?
Getting buy-in by just when we started this, showing how being able to compare the sample sizes, like we're using more data. The flexibility of using the Runtimes module. When someone asks me a question, I'm like, oh, well, let me show you how to do that in Swiftly. And they're like, oh, this, I didn't know I could do that. This is great. So just getting it reinforced, this is something that's easy to use. You just gotta, it's like, muscle memory. You just have to get used to it. As time goes on, getting more buy-in with the team on using the Runtimes modules.
Awesome, thank you. So that concludes my questions. I want to jump to some audience questions now. And don't forget, if we don't get to your question, we will follow up with you. But let's jump into this one. Between which 2 months did this bump in on-time performance first occur? And the person says, looking to get a frame of reference for when during the throes of the pandemic, this was all occurring. So yeah, contextualize that with kind of the time frame for us.
So the increase in on-time performance, this happened with our June 2021 schedule. So that was 6 months ago when we changed the schedules, and that's when we saw the increase in running time, or the increase in OTP was in June and over the summer.
When do you normally analyze the on-time performance after a service change? Do you try to let it kind of stabilize after the pick, or is it just an ongoing measurement?
Yeah, so we'll monitor, the on-time performance of routes that we have adjusted to see how they're doing and provide that data to our planning and scheduling team. Scheduling team also likes to, they keep in close contact with the bus divisions, and so they hear back if there's a problem with the schedule not working.
Here's a question. Tell us how you managed layovers during such a tumultuous time.
So the way layovers were managed, after we implemented the changes to running times, to kind of prepare ourselves in case traffic returned and travel times became longer, we scheduled more layovers or more layover time. We increased the layover time for all the vehicles to keep the same cycle time. So that was a challenge for some of our supervisors at the different terminals, especially our crowded terminals, that there were more buses now sitting at the terminals, and so they did have to manage that and keep terminals as free of congestion as possible.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What times we live in. Here's one more question I think we'll have time for. Does this tool use something like the 95th percentile run times to make suggestions? So I'll take that one, unless you feel comfortable, Matt. That sounds like one for Swiftly.
Yeah, I'll let you take that one.
Sure. This tool can show you the 95th percentile run times. You can adjust and see any percentiles. So that's certainly a helpful kind of marker. And I think many agencies do want to look at their run times through that lens. The suggestions tool in particular does not use just a straight percentile view. It's a little more complex than that, and I can kind of summarize it. And then we have lots of literature on our methodology as well. But we're really trying to optimize for that on-time performance window. So whether it's 1 minute early to 4 minutes late, or whatever your particular agency setting is, we want to see what run times would be required to get most of your stops into that on-time performance window. So that wasn't a particularly elegant answer, but it's slightly more nuanced. And we will certainly be able to follow up with more methodology if anybody is interested. So with that, I want to thank you, Matt, for your time. I want to thank you for joining us today from all over the country, all over the world, I see in some cases. So really appreciate your attendance, and we look forward to a couple of things. Your survey responses. After this Zoom, you'll see a little survey. It's just a couple questions that will pop up. And then also your feedback or your requests after this demo. Like I said, our team is happy to answer those for you. So thanks again, Matt. It's always a pleasure talking with you. Really looking forward to continuing on this journey and learning more about the work you do with the Runtimes APIs next.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.